Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Can you believe that it's been 50 years since the Canada-Soviet Summit Series in 1972? 50 years! A series that may have changed the face of hockey. It's also a series that may have changed the face of Canadian identity. More to talk about the impact of that Summit Series on the sport and the country in general is journalist Scott Morrison. He's the author of 1972, the series that changed Canada forever. The book is published by Simon & Schuster and also available in accessible formats from the Centre for Equitable Library Access. And Scott is speaking to us from Toronto. Hey, Scott, thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Scott, I'm curious what made you want to write this book?
Well, I mean, it's the fact that a lot of people still talk about that series 50 years later speaks to the impact and the significance and the magnitude that it had. This was a series that affected a country, it affected the people. It was a series of moments that brought a country together. And it's a series that, as the title says, changed the game forever. It opened up the doors of international hockey, and the fact that we have Soviets and Czechs and Russians and Swedes and everyone else playing in the National Hockey League or playing in various leagues around the league together is all a result of how that series changed the game.
Yeah, it's remarkable to see the way in which that just exploded the way that hockey was played around the world. It also became a bit of a realization for the sport, which had been so North American-centric for so long. So I'm curious how perhaps the series actually changed the style with which hockey is played.
I think it was a great learning experience for both countries at that time. I mean, we were very much set in our ways in terms of the Canadians playing in the National Hockey League and our training methods, and summer was a time to relax or off-season jobs in many cases for the players. You went to training camp and that's how you worked yourself into shape for the regular season, whereas the Soviets had different training methods, and so we learned from some of the things they did, and they learned from us. They learned that they were very robotic in how they played, and the Canadians adapted throughout that series, and they didn't change with them and adapt their game. And that was a lesson they learned when it was over. And the other lesson they learned was just the Canadians refused to quit mentality, refused to give up before the buzzer goes, and never say it's over until that buzzer goes. That kind of mindset was something that drifted into their game as well. So there was a lot of learning experiences on many levels on and off the ice.
Scott, I have to confess that I was negative 11 years old when this series took place, but I've also been deeply fascinated in this series, and my father and so many people in my life have talked to me about what this meant. But something I didn't realize until I was talking to a colleague last night in preparation for this is that the way in which North American hockey was operating from a professional level with the rise of the WHA in conjunction with the NHL may have impacted the way that Canada put together a team. I'm wondering if you can describe what the landscape was in North American hockey from a professional perspective going into the series.
Well, going into that 72 season, so that summer when they put the team together, the WHA was born, and they were coming out. They professed to have a lot of money, and they were making rich overtures to a lot of great players in the National League, such as a Bobby Hall, a J.C. Tremblay, a Jerry Cheevers, Derek Sanderson, and many others. And Hall obviously was the premier name that would have been on the roster. But because the way it evolved, it was a venture that was Hockey Canada, which was just born, the CHA, and the NHL, and Alan Eagleson, who was the head of the NHL Players Association at the time. So the way it ultimately evolved to get the NHL on side to allow the bulk of all those players to participate. Basically, the rule was that you had to be under contract to an NHL team when the training camp started. Otherwise, you weren't eligible to play, meaning if you signed with the WHA, you couldn't play for Team Canada. And that, Phil Esposito was outraged at the time because he wanted his pal and a great goalie, Jerry Cheevers, on the team. He wanted Bobby Hall on the team, but he said, hey, call it Team NHL, don't call it Team Canada. But that was the politics. You always find politics
Mm.
involved on many levels in everything, and that was the politics of it. So, therefore, Bobby Hall wasn't allowed. The Prime Minister Trudeau at the time, the other Trudeau, uh, he tried to get him put on the team, but it wasn't allowed, and so a controversy on that front. But it wasn't. People were disappointed that Bobby, for instance, and some of the others as well, weren't allowed to play, but it didn't seem catastrophic at the time going into training camp because everybody was of the mind, and virtually everybody. There were some naysayers who proved to be very smart, but everybody was of the mind this was just going to be a friendly series. Canada would dominate it. They'd win all 8 games or 7 of the games. They'd win them handily. And so, really, it didn't matter that a few really good players couldn't be a part of the roster. They were missing Bob Orr as well, of course, but his was because of an injury, the famous knee injuries.
When did that expectation or perception change? Was it that first game in Montreal, or did it come a little bit longer down the pipeline?
Oh, it was definitely the first game in Montreal. I think for the fans, it didn't happen till probably end of the first period. Canada came out strong. They scored 30 seconds into the game. They had another goal 6 minutes in. They're up 2-0, and everything looked like, okay, they're going to romp. The romp is on. By the end of the period, it's all tied up. And I think at that point, people are saying, this isn't the way it's supposed to go, but it'll be okay. Meanwhile, in the dressing room, the players are even, after it was 2-0, the players are sitting on the bench talking to each other saying, oh my God, these guys are good. They're in great condition, which we aren't. And this is going to be a tougher series than we had anticipated. I think after that first game, 7-3, it was pretty clear at that point that there is a lot of nervous Canadians wondering how this series was going to shake down.
What was the national temperature after the 4 games in Canada, heading over to Europe for a couple of friendlies with Finland and Sweden before resuming the Summit Series? What was the conversation like inside the country of Canada amongst people?
Canada was angry. I mean, Vancouver was really kind of the postcard for that final game in Vancouver, the 4th game, where they lost. It was only 5-3 on the scoreboard, but it was a very lopsided game. And from very early in that game, the fans were booing. I mean, as the series evolved, there was the shock of the first game in Montreal, and then, there was relief because they bounced back, but a nail biter in Toronto. And then, they blow a lead and tie in Winnipeg, and then the Vancouver game unravels. And the country felt betrayed. They felt that the team was letting them down, that the team was underperforming, that the team was just taking it too easy and underestimated their opponents, and they just weren't very good. And it was after that game that Phil Esposito had the famous speech on TV with the host Johnny Esau, and he said, we're trying hard, folks. We're giving it everything we've got. We sacrificed our time. We're proud of our country. We hate what's happening here. But you also have to finally acknowledge these guys are good and they're better than we were told. We were all kind of sold a bill of goods. And I think that was kind of the point when the country was angry, as I say, and mad at the team. But maybe that was the point when they stopped and thought, you know what, that other team is pretty good.
The team goes over to the Soviet Union, wins a number of games over there, including the historic goal by Paul Henderson to win that last game, the 8th game in the Summit Series. If Canada doesn't go and bounce back in the Soviet Union, what kind of conversations do you think would happen around national identity in this country?
It was a tough time in the country anyway. The country was very much divided. We'd gone off a high of 67 with Expo and the centennial celebrations and a lot of promise and hope and good feelings. And then, in the 70s, we had the FLQ and the October crisis and, a lot of things, the War Measures Act in place because of what was happening in Quebec at that time. And as I say, the West was off on its own. Quebec was dealing with its issues and the undercurrent of not wanting to be a part of the country. And there was just so much going on at the time. And we really needed, as a nation, something to rally around. And, oddly enough, and I guess it's the Canadian way, what's our where were you moment? Well, it's Paul Henderson scoring a goal. What's a rallying moment for a country that desperately needed it? It was that series, because people talk about it and the players felt it, and talk about it, that through those final games of the series, it meant so much to win because of the politics of the day as well. It was the pride of hockey. Hockey's our game. We went in there thinking we were the absolute best and we're going to show it. And all of a sudden we're getting challenged, desperately challenged. But the politics of the day, the Cold War was on. The Soviets were a black and white, scary image on the newsreels, because we didn't really know what they're about. Other than that, it was West versus East. It was capitalism versus communism. The world was a scary place at that point, and a lot of unknowns, including that hockey team. So getting through that and being able to win was a real defining moment for the country, and it was something that brought the country together. And as I say, Canada desperately needed to have that moment to feel good about itself.
What do you remember about the Henderson goal in the 8th game of the series?
Well, that final game was just so incredible that they were down 5-3 going into the third period, and you're not feeling pretty good at that point. Although the players all insisted, the confidence level and the calm in the dressing room before going into that period was they felt good. They thought they could get it done, and they kind of had a plan for it. And then all of a sudden they get back, tie it up, and I think at that point, not knowing that the Soviets were playing games with the goal differential and were going to claim a victory had there been a tie in that final game, for the series, you're kind of relieved that they had tied it up, and then for him to score is just absolute elation. I mean, it's just, it's, as they say, it's a where were you moment to so many people across this country. And the country stood still that day and the days leading up to it, because we were just so enamored by it and so taken in and so needing to have, as I say, that feel-good moment, and to see that team come back and save the pride of a hockey nation.
Scott, one last question before we let you go. Obviously, that's the most important Canadian national goal of all time. But is it your favorite? I mean, there's the Crosby in 2010 in Vancouver. I'm a real sucker for the Jordan Eberle game-tying goal against the Russians at the World Juniors in 2009. But I'm curious, which one is your favorite?
I think that one's the favorite because that series was the first, and it'll never be recreated. And the circumstance and, as I say, the politics and the emotion around that series and how it was so unpredictable in terms of how it unfolded. That one makes it special. As Paul Henderson says, he scored his most beautiful goal in Game 7 to win that game. He says, I scored a garbage goal in Game 8 to win the game and the series, and I'm remembered for that one. But it was certainly the most significant. And I think what's been special, to your point, Dave, is that over the years, for different generations, we've had special goals. In '87, we had Gretzky to Lemieux to beat the Soviets, the Russians there, ironically 6-5, the same score as '72. And then, we had Sydney with the 2010 golden goal, and Eberle with the World Junior goal. So we've had those special moments for different generations, and it all is because none of it would have happened, no doubt, without that 72 series happening in the first place.
Scott, I've long admired your work. Thank you for making time for us today. It was a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure too, and thank you very much, Dave.
That's Scott Morrison, the author of the book 1972, the series that changed Canada forever. You can find this book available in accessible formats as well from the Centre for Equitable Library Access. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV, or download the podcast wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV, or download the podcast wherever you listen.